So let's start at the beginning of this unlikely story. Edward Joseph Snowden, born on June 21st, 1983, in North Carolina, to a family with strong ties to public service. His father worked in the Coast Guard, his mother was employed at the district court, and even his grandfather was a high-ranking official in the FBI. From all accounts, the trajectory for Snowden seemed clear. He was destined for a life working with the government.
But he didn't exactly take the traditional path, did he? I mean, mononucleosis in high school led him to miss nearly 9 months and ultimately skip finishing formal schooling. Instead, he got his GED and then taught himself, gaining incredible tech skills along the way.
Indeed, his self-taught expertise in computer systems soon landed him positions that few could dream of. Snowden's career path took him to the CIA, where in 2011 he worked undercover in Geneva, tasked with securing the agency's digital communication systems. Despite his relatively junior role, he was considered a rising star in cybersecurity.
And yet, working behind those CIA doors wasn't all smooth sailing, was it? He reportedly became disillusioned after witnessing questionable practices, like when he claimed the CIA got a Swiss banker drunk to coerce sensitive information. That wasn't really sitting well with him, was it?
No, it began planting seeds of doubt. But it wasn't until later, during his time at the National Security Agency, or NSA, that things really came to a head. Snowden eventually took on a contract with Booz Allen Hamilton, and it was here within the depth of America's intelligence systems that he uncovered the true scale of government surveillance. Programs with names like PRISM and X-Keyscore, which could essentially reach into lives, tracking calls, emails, and even browsing history of ordinary citizens.
Wait, PRISM? This was the system that gave the NSA access to data from tech giants like Google and Facebook, right? That's such an invasion of privacy.
Exactly, and if that wasn't troubling enough, in March 2013, James Clapper, the Director of National Intelligence, testified under oath that the NSA wasn't collecting data on millions of Americans. Snowden later described that moment as the straw that broke the camel's back.
I can't believe he just lied straight to Congress.
Snowden couldn't either, and it pushed him into action. By June of that year, he was sitting in a hotel room in Hong Kong, armed with thousands of classified NSA documents. He had carefully chosen journalists like Glenn Greenwald and Laura Poitras to expose the espionage programs. It was a calculated move, not just to leak the information, but to make sure it was responsibly shared with the world.
And it all started with him anonymously reaching out, first under the pseudonym Cincinnatus. The courage it must have taken, knowing the sheer risks involved.
Absolutely. He orchestrated the release of this information with incredible precision. And while he quickly became a hero to some and a traitor to others, one thing was clear: Edward Snowden forever changed the global conversation about privacy and government surveillance.
By the time Snowden's carefully orchestrated leaks made headlines and threw global surveillance programs into the spotlight, his world had irrevocably changed. Sitting in his Hong Kong hotel room, he had prepared for the storm that followed. Once his identity was unveiled, Snowden rapidly became the face of one of the most polarizing debates between privacy and security, and the target of a high-stakes manhunt.
And Hong Kong didn't hold on to him for long, did they? I mean, once the US came looking to extradite him, he had to pack up pretty quickly.
That's right. By late June, Snowden found himself in Moscow, completely unintentionally, or so he claimed. He had been en route to places like Ecuador or Venezuela to seek asylum when his US passport was revoked, effectively trapping him in the transit zone of Sheremetyevo Airport. And there he stayed for over a month, scrambling to secure some form of legal safety.
How surreal is that? Stuck in an airport while headlines around the world debated whether he was a hero or a traitor.
Exactly. Russia eventually granted him asylum on the condition that he would stop leaking classified information. He received temporary refugee status and later, in 2020, permanent residency. And then, in 2022, came the bombshell. Snowden was granted Russian citizenship by President Putin.
That caused a real stir. Some people saw it as him securing his safety. Others painted it as the final betrayal of the country he once said he was trying to protect.
And that's the paradox of Edward Snowden. To many, choosing Russian citizenship felt like siding with a government notorious for surveillance and suppression, something he had fought against. It cast a shadow over his credibility for some, even as he continued to advocate for privacy rights and speak out against government overreach.
But to his supporters, it wasn't about loyalty to any one nation, was it? They saw it as a necessary measure for survival.
You're right. Yet, the divisions in public opinion were stark. Let's not forget President Obama's reaction back when the leaks first emerged. He criticised the sensational reporting of the revelations, but defended the necessity of intelligence operations, suggesting Snowden could have raised his concerns through proper channels.
Which, of course, was a point of contention. Snowden argued those channels wouldn't have worked and would have buried the truth.
Precisely. Journalists working with Snowden, like Glenn Greenwald, emphasised the heroism of his actions. Greenwald even said Snowden's decision to reveal what he had was a tremendous contribution to democracy. But US authorities saw it differently, calling his disclosures a grave threat to national security.
And throughout all this, Snowden's journey turned him into a global symbol, someone who forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about surveillance in the digital age. But at what personal cost?
The cost was enormous. He gave up his freedom, any semblance of a normal life, and remains exiled from the US. Whether hero or traitor, his story is inextricably tied to how we think about privacy today. And his actions didn't just spark debate, they created ripples across the world.
After enduring the personal cost of his actions and becoming a global symbol, Edward Snowden's disclosures didn't just spark debate, they led to real, tangible change. One of the clearest examples is the USA Freedom Act of 2015. This piece of legislation was a direct response to the outrage ignited by his revelations and represented the first major rollback of government surveillance powers in over a decade.
Oh yes, I remember. It ended that bulk collection of Americans' phone metadata by the NSA, didn't it? But wasn't it also criticised for not going far enough?
Indeed it was. While it curbed some of the NSA's power, many privacy advocates felt it lacked the sweeping reforms they hoped for. Still, it was a remarkable shift, proof that one individual's actions could ignite change on such an institutional level.
But Snowden didn't just shake up policy in the US, did he? Globally, countries started rethinking their surveillance strategies. Privacy became a hot-button issue almost overnight, and for a lot of people, it was the first time they realised just how invasive these programs were.
Absolutely. In places like Germany and Brazil, Snowden's leaks prompted deep introspection. Leaders like Angela Merkel spoke out against mass surveillance after discovering even their personal communications had been intercepted. It wasn't just a shock to citizens, it disrupted international relationships.
And at the heart of it all was this ethical question. When is whistleblowing justified? Snowden himself wrote in his memoir that he felt compelled to act not out of disloyalty, but because he believed people had the right to know what was being done to them in the name of national security.
That's a powerful point. Snowden once said, "I do not want to live in a world where everything I do and say is recorded." A statement that resonated with many. But it also raised the question, should one person get to decide what's in the public interest? The debate over his motives and methods continues to this day.
And isn't that the lingering ripple? Because whether people see him as a hero or a traitor, they can't ignore the fact that he made us think, really think, about what privacy means in the digital age.
You're right. Snowden's actions forced governments and individuals alike to confront uncomfortable truths. He shone a light into the shadows of surveillance, sparking a conversation that we're still having. And though his critics argue he compromised security, his supporters see him as a patriot for democracy.
Whatever side of the fence you're on, there's no denying he changed the world. And his story serves as a reminder of the power and the cost of standing up for what you believe is right.
Indeed. So as we close this chapter, perhaps the real legacy of Edward Snowden is the questions he leaves us with. How much privacy are we willing to sacrifice for security? And, more importantly, who gets to decide? And with that, we bring this episode to an end.
Thanks so much for joining us today. Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.